Welcome back, everyone, to our Wisdom of the Church Fathers series. We're really excited today because we're going to be exploring a truly monumental work.
That's right. We're looking into Augustine's City of God. And for those of you, our listeners, who are deep into theological studies, grappling with those big questions about faith, history, the human condition, Augustine is just essential.
He really is. He offers this incredible framework that honestly still resonates so powerfully today. And our aim here isn't just to give you a summary. We want to try and, pull out some of those aha moments from the text itself.
Exactly. Those surprising connections, maybe, or the truths that just feel enduring, things that can really shape how you understand things on your own theological journey.
We'll be digging into his critique of the earthly city and, importantly, his vision of the heavenly city. We really hope this is helpful for your studies. And hey, while you're here, if you find this valuable, please do like and subscribe, maybe hit that notification bell. It helps others find the series.
Definitely. So where should we start? The context, maybe? Why did Augustine even write this massive work?
Good question. It wasn't written in a vacuum, was it? There was a specific event.
Right. The immediate trigger was the sack of Rome in 410 AD. I mean, this sent shockwaves through the empire.
Understandably.
And a lot of pagans immediately started saying, see? This happened because we abandoned our traditional gods for Christianity.
Okay. So Augustine is writing in part as a response. An apologetic, almost.
Precisely. He's defending the faith against that charge. But he does much more than just defend. He goes on the offensive, in a way.
How so?
Well, he meticulously shows that actually Rome suffered plenty of disasters before Christianity, back when everyone was supposedly worshiping the pagan gods correctly.
Okay, so puncturing that specific argument.
Exactly. And then he makes this bigger point. Whatever virtues Rome did have, whatever success the empire achieved, that wasn't down to Jupiter or Mars. That was ultimately allowed or even given by the one true God.
So the crisis becomes a launching pad for this much grander theological vision.
That's it, perfectly. His main goal, running through all 22 books, is really to glorify the city of God by contrasting it sharply with the earthly city.
It's a huge undertaking. I remember Erasmus saying something about it being difficult but rewarding.
Yeah, he called Augustine's style something like obscure, subtle, and of a less than charming prolixity. But he insisted the effort yields real, wealth of insight.
Right, and part of that insight comes from his pretty sharp critique of Roman religion and morality itself. He doesn't hold back.
Not at all. He points out that the gods didn't give Rome good laws, nor did they prevent its moral decline. In fact, sometimes they seem to encourage it.
You mean like with the public games and theater shows?
Exactly. He talks about how the theatrical performances held in honor of the gods were often, frankly, obscene and seemed designed to stir up vice.
That's a bold claim against the state religion.
It is, and he makes this fascinating point that even respected Romans often held higher moral standards than their gods were depicted as having. Like, they excluded actors from civic honors because their profession was seen as base.
While the gods they supposedly worshipped were involved in all sorts of scandals in their own myths.
Precisely. He highlights those myths, the disgraceful acts attributed to the gods themselves. He even uses the fall of Troy. They worshiped the same gods as the Greeks, didn't they? To show the gods' weakness or indifference.
So it's not just external criticism. He's using their own traditions and history against them.
Yes, and he brings in Roman historians like Sallust, pointing to accounts of deep-seated vice and corruption in Rome long before Christ.
So the idea that Rome was some moral utopia under the pagan gods just doesn't hold water, according to Augustine.
Not according to Augustine, and not even according to some of their own sources. He even pokes fun at the absurdity of claiming divine ancestry, mentioning how Varro admitted some of those stories were just, made up for political reasons. And he asks these pointed questions like, why would gods punish Paris for adultery but ignore the alleged seduction of Romulus's mother, who was a Vestal virgin? That was a huge offense in Roman terms.
It really paints a picture of a religious system that, in his analysis, lacked a solid ethical foundation.
I think that's fair to say. And this whole critique, this taking apart of the earthly city's foundations, sets the stage for his core concept, the two cities.
Okay, let's unpack that. The two cities. What's the fundamental idea?
Well, the basic idea is that in this world, there are these two distinct societies, two cities, mystically speaking, the earthly city and the heavenly city.
And they're sort of intertwined, mixed together for now.
Exactly. They coexist, all tangled up in human history, and they won't be fully separated until the Last Judgment.
So what makes them different? What defines citizenship in one versus the other?
It all comes down to love, the fundamental orientation of the heart.
Okay, so the earthly city.
The earthly city is defined by the love of self, pushed even to the point of contempt for God. Its citizens seek glory from other people. They're driven by pride, ambition, the desire for earthly power and pleasure.
Right. Seeking validation horizontally, you might say.
That's a good way to put it. And the heavenly city, then?
That's defined by the love of God, pushed even to the point of contempt for self, or at least self-importance. Its citizens find their ultimate glory in God. Their focus is vertical.
Perfect. And Augustine uses biblical figures to illustrate this, doesn't he? Right from the beginning.
He does. Cain and Abel are his prime examples early on. Cain, building his earthly city, driven by envy and self-will, represents the earthly city.
While Abel, the pilgrim, the sojourner, whose sacrifice pleased God, represents the heavenly city.
And how does one become a citizen? Is it just by birth?
Well, for the earthly city, Augustine says yes, it's through natural birth, which he sees as connected to our fallen nature, to sin. But citizenship in the heavenly city, that's different. It's not automatic. It comes through God's grace, through spiritual rebirth. It's a gift, not an entitlement.
This whole concept of the two cities, based on these two loves, it's such a powerful lens for looking at history, at society, even at our own motivations, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's one of his most enduring contributions, and it shapes how he then thinks about God's providence, particularly regarding something like the Roman Empire.
Right, because he couldn't just dismiss Rome's success. How did he explain it, if not through the favor of the pagan gods?
Well, his view is quite nuanced. He argues that God did allow the Roman Empire to grow vast and powerful, but not because they worshiped Jupiter correctly.
So why then?
He suggests it was because of certain civic virtues the Romans possessed, at least in their earlier history. Things like a dedication to the public good over private gain, a sense of duty, courage.
Okay, he acknowledges those virtues.
He does, but, and this is crucial, he argues, that even these virtues were ultimately misdirected. They were aimed at achieving earthly glory, fame, the praise of men, not the glory of the one true God.
So, good qualities, but aimed at the wrong ultimate end, rooted in the earthly city's love of self, essentially.
Exactly. It was about human achievement and recognition. He even uses examples like Regulus, a Roman hero famous for keeping his oath, even though it meant returning to Carthage to be tortured and killed.
Wow.
But Regulus swore that oath by his false gods. Augustine uses this to say, look, if pagans could show such commitment to false deities out of a sense of honor, imagine the faithfulness Christians owe to the true God.
That's a powerful rhetorical move. Did he also question the nature of the empire itself, all that expansion through war?
Oh, definitely. He asks, is an empire that's constantly fighting, constantly needing war to sustain or expand itself, is that really a sign of true greatness or peace? It raises questions about the cost of empire.
A question that still echoes today, I suppose.
Very much so. And he points to events in his own time, like the defeat of the pagan Gothic king Radagaisus, as evidence that the true God holds ultimate power over kingdoms, regardless of who people are worshiping.
It's a complex view of history, God working providentially, even through the actions and mixed motives of empires rooted in the earthly city.
Precisely. And this critical lens extends beyond just history and morality. He applies it directly to pagan theology and philosophy, too.
Right. He wasn't shy about taking on their core beliefs, the whole pantheon of gods, for instance.
Completely rejects it. He has sections where he almost mocks the sheer number of specialized gods and goddesses like Felicity for happiness or Fortune for luck. He shows the inconsistencies and, frankly, the silliness in much of what passed for civil theology.
Civil theology. That was the state-sponsored religion tied up with politics.
Yes, exactly. Varro, a respected Roman scholar, had tried to categorize it all, and Augustine uses Varro's own work to show its contradictions and absurdities. He found it ultimately man-made and often manipulative.
What about things like astrology or the idea of fate? Those were huge in the Roman world.
He tackles them head-on. He argues strongly against fatalism, against the idea that our lives are predetermined by the stars or some impersonal destiny.
But he believed in God's foreknowledge, right?
Yeah.
How did he square that?
That's a key point. He affirms God's complete foreknowledge. God knows everything that will happen. But, crucially, he insists this doesn't negate human free will. God knowing what we will choose Doesn't mean God forces us to choose it.
A classic theological tension he wrestles with.
A huge one. And he engages with philosophy, too, especially Platonism, which was very influential.
Does he find anything of value there?
Oh, yes. He respects the Platonists, particularly their understanding of the soul and their search for transcendent truth. He sees them as getting closer to the truth than many others, but he ultimately finds them falling short. They grasped something about the divine, maybe, but they didn't arrive at the personal creator God of the Bible. And crucially, they didn't understand the need for God to become incarnate, for a mediator.
Speaking of mediators, what about the role of demons or spirits in paganism? People often saw them as intermediaries.
Augustine has a lot to say about that. He sees the pagan gods, or spirits, often identified by Neoplatonists, not as helpful intermediaries, but as fallen angels, as demons who actively deceive humans.
So dangerous, not helpful.
Exactly. He contrasts them sharply with the holy angels who serve the true God, and he critiques pagan rituals, things like theology attempts to manipulate spirits as totally inadequate for true spiritual purification. Only Christ, the true mediator, offers that.
This brings us nicely to some of the core Christian theological concepts that Augustine develops or clarifies in City of God, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a treasure trove of theology. Foundational is his insistence on God as the sole, good creator of all things. Everything God made is good.
So where does evil come from then?
Not from God, not from some rival power. Evil, for Augustine, is a privation, a lack of good. It originates in the will, the turning away of a created will, angelic or human, from the highest good, God, towards lesser goods.
A turning away, a disordering of love.
Precisely. Which connects back to the two cities. He also defines true blessedness, true happiness. Where's that found?
Not in this life, ultimately.
Right. Not in the temporary peace or fleeting pleasures of the earthly city. True, eternal blessedness is found only in God, in the life to come.
And he has a lot to say about the human condition, now after the fall.
Yes, he explores the fall of humanity, the concept of original sin, not just as guilt, but as a kind of wound, a disordering of our desires, what he often calls concupiscence or lust, which pulls us towards the earthly city.
Which makes the need for a savior all the more critical.
Absolutely, and that leads him to the centrality of Christ's incarnation. Jesus Christ is the unique mediator between God and humanity, the bridge across the gap caused by sin. There's no other way back to God.
He also does a lot of intricate work connecting the Old Testament to Christ.
Immense work. He reads the Old Testament Christologically, seeing prophecies and figures like the promises to David or priest king Melchizedek as pointing forward to Jesus and the church.
He saw continuity.
Definitely. He also talks about two resurrections, a spiritual one happening now in this life, when someone comes to faith in Christ and passes from death to life.
And then the bodily resurrection at the end of time.
Correct. And one last distinction maybe worth mentioning is the one he makes between latria, the specific kind of worship and adoration due only to God, and the honor or service, dulia, we can rightly give to saints or even fellow humans.
Keeping that distinction clear is vital. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. Bringing it back to our listeners, the theological students, what's the big takeaway? Why should they really grapple with this massive work today?
Well, I think City of God provides just an incredible model for how to engage critically and faithfully with culture and with competing worldviews. Augustine isn't hiding from the challenges of his day. He's meeting them head-on with deep theological reflection.
That's certainly relevant.
And his framework of the two cities, the two loves, it's just such a powerful tool for discernment. It helps you analyze the values driving individuals, societies, even institutions, including the church sometimes. It pushes you to ask, what is ultimately being loved here? What is the ultimate goal?
Even though he was writing about pagan Rome, the core issues feel very contemporary.
They really do. His analysis of idolatry, how societies can worship created things, power, wealth, nation, self, instead of the creator that's timeless, and his deep dive into God's providence versus human freedom, that conversation is still very much alive in theology.
So we really hope this exploration, part of our Wisdom of the Church Fathers series, has given you some valuable insights and maybe spark some new thoughts or questions about Augustine.
Absolutely. His struggle with these huge questions about life, faith, God, suffering, history, it remains profoundly relevant for your studies and looking ahead for your ministry in whatever form that takes.
Yeah, maybe take some time to consider, how does Augustine's analysis of earthly versus heavenly priorities challenge or inform your own understanding of what it means to be a disciple today? What does it say about the church's mission in the world?
And maybe ask yourself, what parts of his critique of Roman culture seem to echo in our own time? What specific questions does reading Augustine, even just hearing about him, raise for you personally?
We genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Please do share any reflections or further questions in the comment section below. Your engagement really does enrich the conversation for everyone.
It really does.
And of course, don't forget to like this discussion if you found it helpful, subscribe for more from the wisdom of the Church Fathers, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration. Thanks so much for joining us today.